thank the Lord. It's a beautiful desert day, not to be taken for granted.
Amen. Thank the Lord.
We are thankful for the privilege of being in the house of God. Thankful for God's graciousness to us. We're thankful that we can pray for many that are traveling, and some across the state, some across the country, and some out of the United States. But God is everywhere and can be with them all. So we thank the Lord. Thank the Lord for his faithfulness to us. And from, I guess, early summer until late summer, our family, when I was growing up, we worked in the harvest, and we, let's see, we traveled different parts of the state. Actually, when I was quite young, we traveled out of the state to Idaho. Some of you have heard of Idaho. I don't know how many have been there. But they would have a harvest of potatoes until November. And so we would, when we finished Bakersfield, we'd go to Central California, Madera. We'd work there through camp meeting, right up to it, and we'd come home and head for Idaho, and we would work there until November. So we had several months of harvest. And as a result of that, potatoes were mainly what we picked, but we also, at least some of the older children, I did a little bit. We picked cotton, we picked grapes, string beans, prunes, which is a type of plum, plums, and those we went up to Northern California, and right around Bakersfield they let us glean. My parents, my mother and her sisters would go out to the fields and glean the string beans. Gleaning, of course, you know, is getting what they would leave in the field. In biblical times, and maybe this time too, they were specifically instructed to leave some in the field for those that were in need. As time came on, many, they started deciding what size potatoes they wanted, and so ones that were too small they'd leave, and you could pick them. Nothing was wrong with the potatoes, and some of it, of course, was for the benefit of those in need. I remember when I was a girl picking a bag of potatoes, and the white potatoes were a football. It's amazing. I don't know if you even see those in the market now, but the point being that we are benefited from many crops we harvest. And I remember in the summer, the young men would go and pitch watermelons, they called it, because they get them off the ground, pitch them to someone on the truck, and they'd place them and fill up a truck. And we'd have a pile of watermelons in our backyard, probably about 3-4 feet high. But there were a lot of us, and my mother would get corn, and I remember cutting corn off the cob many times, getting it ready for to be put away for the winter. And as I shared before, our freezer was, I think it was longer than this altar bench. And my parents would butcher a calf. I don't know how many chickens where they got those, but I know some of the places they got the calves, because we would go of a Sunday afternoon, and Daddy would take us driving. We didn't know where, and he'd look. He said, "See that one over there? That's ours." He had chosen a calf that was being fed, ready to be butchered for our family. But in particular, I remember, because I was personally involved, it came of my time. I guess all the other children before me had their turns. And my mother would begin to can. And she would, the vegetables or fruit that she was canning would be beautifully prepared. And after choosing the vegetables or fruit, she would then prepare the vessels that they were to go in. And it was a process. Now, since I've been married, I've had over the years 2 or 3 pressure cookers, but most of them were probably 3 or 4 quarts, not very large, but they were large enough, at least it felt like it, because pressure cookers were, for me, something particularly concerning to work with, but I did. I learned to cook them. Pressure cooker was used before microwave was heard of. In other words, you'd have, if you want to cook some chicken and cook it very well and cook it quickly, you'd put it in a pressure cooker, and it cut down the time maybe to 1/3 of what it normally would and come out tender and tasty. And so, but the pressure cooker my mother used, hold up that seat cushion there, hold it up. The pressure cooker my mother used was as big a round, if you can imagine that round, as that seat cushion. And it would have a lid on it. And what she did first is we peeled all the food that was to be cooked, and she would blanch it and prepare it, and it would be so pretty. I remember looking in amazement how flawless it was. But that wasn't that was just the beginning of the process, because the vessel you put it in would decide whether you ever ate it again or whether it was going to be thrown out. Because you had to clean the vessel. You've heard me share it. Now, Daddy and some of the other folks will probably say, oh, you used a certain, because I hear them all the time, says, oh, that was a number something tub. I don't know how to say that. But the tub was about this big around. And my father had installed a 50-gallon hot water tank in our house, and he had a spout directed out to outside the kitchen window. We had a platform there, and that's where we would sit the tubs, and we would wash them once and scalding. The water coming out of that spout would be jumping. It was such a high temperature, just jumping. And then after we washed them once, and then we put them in another bath, and maybe cold water after that. I can't remember, but I know I remember the hot water. And the point being is that the vessels were flawless, that there was no residue left. They would be crystal clear, no chips, and they were ready for use in canning. Now, my mother used both the quart, most of us know what that is, and she used, were those half gallons? Anyway, very large, might have been a half gallon. And when she finished, we had a house behind our house because there were so many children, and they'd installed shelves out there, and she would line those shelves with the product. And that was out in the country. In town, we still canned and what have you, but what I remember is the preparation of the vessels. And the vessels were so critical that would decide whether you were going to have food for the winter. And we would prepare our food for the winter. Now, the potatoes, we didn't can them, but they had a large room. The same room where they had the shelves of the canning was an open floor, and we'd take those foot-long white potatoes, and we'd lay them all around the floor, nothing touching. And as long as nothing touched them, they were good because it was a cool room, wasn't heated. And so we could go out and pick up potatoes and get a jar of fruit and cook whatever we choose to cook for that particular meal, and this could carry on all through the winter. And as we prepared those vessels, we would put them together, and then after she had added the substance, the pectin and the sugar, and put it in the jars. We always use brand new, you know what jar lids are, and the rings. We'd use both of those would be new. Rings sometime you might could use again, but the lid that had the rubber gasket, you always got new ones because you wanted it to seal, and then you put the rim on after you put that on. And she put, it seemed like close to a dozen, I don't know how many, in this big pot. And then she put the lid on and heated up to a temperature until they were all sealed, everything sterilized outside, and we let it cool down, take them out over and over again. And that was with a cooler. We didn't have an air conditioner out in the country. In town, I guess we didn't have it. We had a cooler there too. But that didn't stop her preparing with very specific and particular effort, preparing the vessels to be used. Now, I have shared this story from time to time, and I remember somewhere I said I never saw a spoiled jar of fruit or vegetables all the years that my mother can. And other people said, well, I've seen them. I said, well, I've never seen them. But the key is, we got it now, preparing the vessel. That the vessel had to be without exception. It had to be clean, sterilized, without cracks or holes or anything in it. And when you did that, you then, no, that's another card. No, it's got it. Oh, okay. And when you did that, then you were prepared to maintain and to prosper. And vessels down through the ages have been of critical import. When, over in the Old Testament, when Joseph had been brought from the dungeon, the king had dreams, you probably remember this, and he needed an interpretation. Joseph gave him the interpretations, and he said, we will need to prepare for a famine. And that was probably the beginning of major vessels being created. I am not certain, I guess I should have researched that, but that's something we can still research. But I got the impression some of the vessels might be as tall as this room and as big around as a car. In other words, filling them, and he told them they would have 7 years of plenty and then 7 years of famine. And so he prepared those vessels for the preservation of food. Now, just to bring our mind's eye to what I'm speaking of, if he hadn't taught them and they hadn't prepared, the whole world would have starved, because it was a famine across most of the known world.